Hey, happy Friday. This week we learned a lot about the new chip that might bring Huawei back to life. Then a new study told us that cars are apparently a privacy nightmare. And we also learned which companies and platforms the EU wants to crack down on next. Oh, and my editor Adam is on holidays, so you'll just have to deal with my mediocre editing skills. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. This video was sponsored by Nebula, where we now offer lifetime memberships for a limited time. Okay, this week we start the brief with a $600 Polaroid camera, the i2, which has autofocus and LiDAR, manual controls, and more. That is a weirdly futuristic retro camera. Next, Google officially announced a new 3D Android logo showing off a rather large boy, and also unofficially leaked the Pixel 8 again, this time with full 360-degree previews that even detailed things like the phone's new temperature sensor. Classic Google. Then, Samsung this week brought out its Thumb Brown Edition Galaxy Z Fold 5 and the Galaxy Watch 6 for those who want to spend way more on their tech than they really have to. And over in Taiwan, MediaTek announced that it successfully developed its first chip using TSMC's leading-edge 3nm technology, which is now all set to ramp up in volume production. Meanwhile, in Britain, the government thankfully admitted defeat in its controversial fight to break encryption after everyone from Apple to Signal and WhatsApp said that they'd rather leave the country if the bill fully passed. And finally, over in China, their government reportedly banned iPhones from use in more government-backed agencies and state-owned companies in an attempt to push back against the US. Okay, and for my first story of the week, we have to talk about the exciting new chip in the Huawei Mate 60 series of phones, which has caused both a lot of excitement and panic. So last week we talked about the Mate 60 series having its own Kirin 9000S silicon with an SoC that is almost completely designed and made in China as well. And this week we saw lots of teardowns and tests by people in China, including an excellent one by Kirin that I've linked down below, but also by multiple foreign analysts like Tech Insights, which together have confirmed a few things. First, the SoC is indeed made by SMIC using a 7nm process, meaning it's about 2 to 3 generations behind, and all the analysts that I found claim that it is actually surprisingly well made. There's 5G on the chip, of course, and the performance of that seems pretty competitive overall. Now, a lot of components outside of the SoC itself are needed for the 5G stack, like filters and whatever, and we don't know if Huawei can make all of those in China, but either way, this is a major achievement for a company that hasn't had 5G chips in their phones for multiple years now. Meanwhile, Kirin claims that Huawei ported its self-designed ARM CPU cores from its server products over to its phones, and together with the company's first ever self-designed GPU, the new Kirin chip can roughly match a 2.5-year-old Snapdragon 888 chip in both performance and efficiency. Again, that is actually pretty impressive. Famous analyst Ming-Chi Kuo claims that Qualcomm is the main loser from Huawei's success, as the company has reportedly purchased between 40 and 42 million chipsets from Qualcomm in 2023. Even worse for Qualcomm, and this is just my theory, but Huawei could also decide to start selling its chips to competing Chinese manufacturers to boost up its production capabilities as well, which would hurt Qualcomm even more. Interestingly, Ming-Chi Kuo claims that Qualcomm will likely start a price war as early as Q4 2023 to prevent any loss of business, which is pretty wild. So understandably, a lot of alarm bells and victory celebrations have been going off around the world, depending on where people stand, basically claiming that Huawei has completely beaten the US sanctions, but I think it is a little bit too early to say that just yet. Reports on yield rates are all over the place and they're basically impossible to verify for now, and we still haven't seen convincing proof that China's SMIC could get past 7 or maybe 6nm anytime soon either. Also, Korea's SK Hynix is opening an investigation into the Mate 60 Pro because it uses its RAM and NAND flash memory, which the company claims it doesn't actually sell to Huawei in order to comply with US sanctions. Maybe these memory chips came from an earlier stockpile or something, but I guess, oops, that sounds like it would be a problem. Anyway, Huawei clearly has a lot to celebrate. This is a major milestone, but I wouldn't hold a final victory parade just yet. I think we have to wait a little bit further for that. Okay, and for my second story of the week, if you thought that Alexa and your phone spying on you was a big deal, wait until you hear about your car. 25 brands were reviewed for privacy by Mozilla, who claims that car privacy is the worst the company has seen yet. Cars are full of sensors, including cameras that are constantly watching how tired you are, microphones that listen to your voice, GPS trackers that see where you're going, a radio that knows what you're listening to, etc. And the data from those is combined with your personal data that you give away during your purchase and your associated use in the various apps and more. This includes your birth date, your race, and even your immigration status, your daily activities, etc., and even the sexual activities that you have in the car in case of two brands. Nissan, what are you doing? Just leave the horny people be. Anyway, they of course then also take all of that data and they keep selling it. In the US, 84% of brands share user data with outside partners like data brokers, and 92% don't even provide any real control over this data collection. Cool and normal. Oh, and perhaps to nobody's surprise, Tesla was the worst ranked brand in the study, but basically every car company failed terribly. Mozilla says that cars were by far the worst category that they've seen in terms of privacy yet, and I guess it means that maybe a couple of years down the line we'll have a privacy-focused car brand or something like that. It's kind of bound to happen. Okay, and for my third story of the week, the European Union's massive new digital law called the Digital Markets Act is here, and we've just learned which platforms it will actually impact. This is the list of the platforms that will have to comply, which will now have 6 months to become interoperable with competing services without any lock-ins, and which their parents won't be allowed to use to self-preference anymore due to being too big. That's a pretty big list. And meanwhile, here are a few platforms that are curiously missing. That includes iMessage, Bing, Edge, Gmail, Outlook.com, macOS, iPadOS, and all of Samsung's apps and services. These were all declared as either offering no real lock-in to core platforms, or the EU decided that they just didn't have significant market share. Bing accounts for just 3% of searches in Europe, and Apple argued that iMessage does not meet the 45 million plus user threshold to qualify as a core platform service. Given that about 100 million people actually use iOS in Europe, that means that less than half of the iOS users actually decided to use iMessage as well, and now Apple is weirdly incentivized to not increase that number too much. Anyway, theoretically, for example, Microsoft shouldn't be allowed to leverage Windows to shove Edge and Bing into users' faces, alternative app stores will have to be allowed on iOS and Android, and a whole lot of other wild things should happen if all goes according to plan. That sounds like a truly monumental shift is just around the corner, and I'm weirdly interested to see how it will actually go. Okay, and to finish up, there's a thing that me and a bunch of other Nebula creators have been asked about relentlessly over the last couple of days, which I wanted to explain now. So you might have heard by now that Nebula now offers a lifetime membership for the month of September, and the question I keep hearing is why? Nebula is a streaming service with ongoing costs. Why offer an upfront payment option at all? Is this supposed to be a discount of sorts, or is it actually a grift and we're, I don't know, in trouble or something? Actually, it's neither, and it's pretty easy to understand if you understand our business logic. Like any startup, Nebula's growth is limited by how much money we can spend. We need money to develop our apps and to run our servers. We need money to pay for the creation of Nebula Originals and Nebula classes, and also to sponsor creators to talk about the platform. All of this is expensive, and the faster we can pour money into this machine, the faster it will actually grow, and the faster we can afford to make extra content for you to watch. The challenge, of course, is that while subscriptions are a fantastic and super healthy way to fund a business like this, they also mean that most of the revenue from our users actually only comes in many months or even years after they decide to subscribe to the service. And while that's okay, it actually means that our service grows way slower than it could. A typical video streaming startup like Netflix solves this by, for example, selling parts of their company to venture capital firms in exchange for money upfront that they can then spend on marketing and on content production. Netflix has raised hundreds of millions of dollars this way. We, the creators, choose not to do this because we want to keep full creative control over our platform, but we, of course, still want to grow faster if we can, and so this is where lifetime memberships come into the picture. At $300, this is definitely not a discount. In fact, if you're looking for the best deal, you should almost certainly choose a regular yearly subscription instead. With my link, that is just $30 a year. but what the $300 can do is actually bring some of that revenue forward so we can invest that now into building a better platform and into making bigger and much more ambitious originals in the future, much faster than we could otherwise. It's basically our version of fundraising, where instead of offering ownership over our company to VCs, we offer lifetime memberships to those of you who want to support us and are willing to take a bet on us. Both options are still available, a regular subscription or a lifetime membership. Whichever you choose, both are linked down in the description. Be sure to use my link because that gets you the most up-to-date prices and it lets Nebula know that I sent you. All right, thank you for considering, and I'll see you next Friday.